Hey, it's me. Now, I don't know which direction I'm going to take this channel in yet. It's brand new. So, we decided to start off with a simple topic for today. Men, masculinity, and love. Now, I'm in my last semester of college, just starting off, so very chaotic time, as you know. A lot is changing, including myself. I decided to make this video for you because I know you're a man or you love men. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is based off of one of the books I read recently, one of the greatest books I've read of all time, like genuinely amazing. And it's, of course, The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love by Bell Hooks.
What the hell?
Ignore the Q-tips. It's a jinx setup. I don't have sticky notes. One of the reasons this book is so great and why it was so compelling to me is in the preface, she says, as a young woman in my 20s who had not yet found her own powers, I often wished the men in my life would die. I was thinking, how often do the women I know think that? Because a lot of my friends are women. I got a sister, a mother, everybody. This seemed very violent, but also I know that she's not the only one who's thought something like that before. It was crazy. However, by the end, she says, healing does not take place in isolation. Men who love and men who long to love know this. We need to stand up by them with open hearts and open arms. We need to stand ready to hold them, offering a love that can shelter their wounded spirits as they seek to find their way home, as they exercise the will to change. Because the way we live in a society, the way society raises us, especially men, is to be dominant. We live in a dominator culture. I've never really explored this before. Bell Hooks describes our political system. This is not a political video. Well, she says people often laugh when she refers to our political system as a imperialist, white supremacist, capitalistic patriarchy. And she has yet to discover what they find funny about accurately naming the system. I too laughed at first when I heard that because it just seemed ridiculous, but I started thinking about it a little bit. She's referring to specifically America, of course. And I realized it's true. Each one of those terms encourages domination. Imperialism, of course, is one nation dominating another. White supremacy, the white race dominates the other races. Capitalism, the rich dominate the working class. And patriarchy, men dominate women. Having that instilled and being into our mind day in and day out from childhood, think about it. Yeah, some people will say, oh, but it's just about raising our kids better and it's like personal responsibility. So let's say you raise your kid and you allow them to express themselves however they want, and they decide to do that by wearing a dress to school. Well, they get there and the other kids on the playground would bully them ruthlessly. Bell Hooks talks about a similar story in the book. Highly recommend, by the way. And can we get a highly recommend counter under Kendrick?
Nigga,
while it's not inherently violent, it's clear, like you'll see on the emotion on the boy's face would be shame, that the patriarchal system that we all grew up in shames us into masking our true selves. Like, my true self is not to like go to school in a dress, but some people's are. I pride myself on trying to be who I am. Yeah, this book caused me to reflect on a lot of the things I do. Like, why do I do what I do? One of the moments when I felt this most intensely was when she said, men are taught that it's not okay to feel any emotion except for anger and fear. Now, like I mentioned, obviously, in my last video, I relate a lot to that. One thing I've recently learned, though, is that anger is just an emotion that's used to mask other emotions. It's a reaction, fight or flight. And that's the same thing, anger and fear, fight or flight. We're reduced to our instincts. Because of that, it has us acting in ways that we just wouldn't if we took time to know who we really are. But most of us don't know who we really are, and that too scares us. Anyways, society convinces you to just like conform back to the system, like from a young age. Everybody remembers middle school and high school. Like, god damn, high school I think is when this might be the worst. Obviously I haven't experienced much past high school. I only graduated a couple years ago, so let me know if this is still true or not. But I think in high school it's when you really get like your role in society like handed to you. Just to be open, you already know this though, but there's a lot of racism in my high school. It was like 4% black, so the 4% of us, we had to stick together. And one week it got so bad that there was damn near a race war in the school, and they threatened to shut it down if there was another fight. And every fight was like black versus white. It was crazy time. You know, it started off as like jokes and everything, and they just wanted to say like, oh, we can say what we want to you, and you can't do anything back to us. But we were not gonna take that message, so we fought back until the school doubled down and said, oh, no fighting, racism bad. So that's good. We've made progress. Obviously, I've talked about the patriarchy many times. I think it affects our lives in more ways than we know. And even though it sounds like it should be good for men, it actually hurts us all. We, of course, can't talk about patriarchy without talking about feminism. Now, I do consider myself a feminist, but I haven't like read up on a ton of feminist literature or anything. That's part of why this book was so impactful to me and why I want to talk about it, because this is the first time when I had something impact me this much. And even in the books, bell hooks mentioned that, you know, there's not a lot of feminist literature targeted toward men, and that's why people have a lot of misperception for it. Men are on board with it. There's nothing showing us like a feminist view of society when we're growing up. It's always just domination, violence. And to give an example of the media we were raised on encouraging violence, patriarchy, she used an example of the Incredible Hulk and Hulk smash. And a survey, when they asked children who watched that cartoon if they had the powers of Incredible Hulk, what would they do with it? And they said, smash their mommies. The Hulk is just a regular weak scientist, you know, but whenever he feels like a bit too much emotion, specifically anger, he turns big, green, essentially loses his mind, just starts breaking everything. But also, he's the strongest there is. So, you know, it's like he loses his mind, but he's the strongest there is. This was one of the first books that made me really feel something in a long time. I enjoyed it, honestly. You know what? I decided I don't want to go too deep into how the patriarchy damages us all. It's very depressing. It made me cry reading it multiple times. Highly recommend. You know how it harms you on a personal level individually, like just from your gut feeling. And I know you relate to maybe not feeling anything. I don't think that's something that's gonna go away within me soon, but you know, I feel it more. There's more and more moments where, you know, I really can feel. So let's get to where the book turns positive. The reason that there is so much male violence and male unhappiness is because society teaches us that what makes you masculine, what makes you a man, is the ability to dominate somebody else, like usually physically. Eventually they raise you saying like at one point or another you're going to be forced to use violence. And honestly, in this day and age, that is simply untrue. It might have been true when you had to like walk down the road and you might, like, for a week-long trip into town, and you might get robbed by a bandit or something, but it's simply an outdated form of thinking. When that moment never comes for most men, they never get a chance to show how dominant, how macho they are. They they realize that their home is the last place where they'll be able to do it. You know, they didn't become the big CEO of their company. They weren't able to do it, like do capitalism. They weren't a great warrior. They weren't able to do it through imperialism. Well, I know we know racism is bad, but the systems. So they can't really outwardly just go down the street and call me a nigger. No matter where they are, they can be a patriarch. As they fail to be a man according to society, then they end up, you know, running the home. Now we all know what a patriarchal head of household is like. We've probably all lived with one. There was always an underlying threat of violence. And when you were young, many of us at least were being as kids. Now, whether or not that's right, like that's not what this video is about. I think it made me a stronger person, but the threat is still there. You know, you do something bad and your mom would say, oh, well, wait until your father gets home. The implication there was, you know, you were gonna face violence. And if an argument ever got really heated, you know, the patriarch of the house would raise their voice very loud, getting louder and louder. You probably have experienced this, but it got really heated and then something violent happened, even if it's just like verbally violent. Many of us know or feel as if there's a crisis in dating, like, oh, dating in this generation is so trash. We see people on their podcast talking about it. We see people on TikTok talking about it, or like the TikTok interviewers. Like, we've all been on Tinder. We've all, yeah, fuck it. Obviously not we all, but like, I have shit. I have. So I've experienced it. And she tells a story where she went to couples therapy with her, where her partner explained that whenever he would try to open up to her, she would kind of reject it or look at him as less of a man because of that. It's something I think we've all experienced before or felt before. There's no one we can really open up to, be emotional with, because they'll see us as less of a man. It's just the truth with most people, which is why I said this book is good for anybody who is a man or loves man. Highly recommend. Donald Dunn is a family therapist, and he sees that a key catalyst for male violence is women seeing behind the male mask. I think when women are defensive of that or don't want it to happen, it's because they're maybe subconsciously trying to protect themselves as well. Because when women see behind the male mask, men sometimes get violent. Oh my gosh, it's hard to explain. You gotta read the whole book. Highly recommend. He may apologize and feel shame immediately after, but he can't sustain that emotion. It's too painful, too reminiscent of hurts long buried. So he blames it on her. If it happens repeatedly with more than one woman, he goes from blaming her to blaming them. His personal shortcomings become rationalized by an evolving misogyny. At that point, the abusiveness is hardwired into the system. The man is programmed for intimate violence. I think a lot of what we see on the internet, on TikTok, and like Andrew Tate type podcasts, is really a lot of that, because you get rejected too many times. I one time I got rejected 11 times in a row. Am I cooked? Chat, am I cooked? Anyways, we keep going. People profit off of programming men to think like that, so we need to unprogram ourselves. And how exactly do we do that? Love and abuse cannot exist in the same relationship. There cannot be love with abuse, and love has no abuse. How can we deprogram ourselves to love? Because we all just want to love again. That's what we should do. I think that's what we've been put on this earth to do, just to love and be kind. Before we answer that, we must ask ourselves another question. What is love? Love is a combination of care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. So we got to make sure that we embody all of those in our daily lives. And the only way we can do that is by getting to know ourselves, remove the mask that society has always told us to wear. Take time with yourself, focus on yourself, and learn who you are. If you don't have anybody to talk about who you are, just you can let me know. I don't know. If you figured out who you are, let me know, and I'll take your identity, I guess, while I figure it out myself. And it's really scary too, learning to be yourself. And I always had pride in being myself. I'm never defensive. Like, I don't get defensive very easy. I don't really judge myself, or at least I thought I didn't, but that's all kind of untrue. It's weird, it's complicated, but you don't have to get through it alone. You actually can't really get through it alone. It's extraordinarily important that you learn to empathize, but you can't empathize with anyone else unless you first empathize with yourself. You almost certainly related to some of the more negative traits about men that I've mentioned, or seen men in your life exhibit those traits and feel kind of hopeless, because how would you get them to change a major part of their identity, their masculinity? I don't have an answer to that. It's scary, like as scary as I'm going through this. Um, Even just talking about it, it's kind of scary. Which reminds me of another poem. I'm just gonna find it live on the spot. Boom, live on the spot. Bell Hooks says, from that time on, I began to think that women were afraid to speak openly about men, afraid to explore deeply our connections to them, and afraid to even acknowledge our ignorance, how much we really do not know about men. I don't think that only applies to women, that applies to myself too, because as I mentioned earlier, we are forced to shove parts of ourselves deep down. So letting them back up, we don't know how that's going to go, and uncertainty is scary, but you got to learn to embrace uncertainty. You have It's extremely important to take time for yourself. I know as life gets more and more hectic, as it seems to every day, it gets harder to take time to know yourself. But if you don't know yourself, you won't be able to forgive yourself, empathize with yourself, and empathize with others. That is the most important thing that you need to do. It's tough, but it's possible. You can do it. I know you've done it before, you can do it again. And it's not going to go perfectly every time, of course. You're going to make more mistakes. But again, having empathy means forgiving yourself. And getting to know yourself means healing your spirit. In the chapter titled Healing the Male Spirit, about a story from Terrence Real, another family therapist. He mentions a moment where a son recalls his mother saying, "She was telling me, 'Let me go, darling. Just let me go. We know that your fathers are brute. We live together in a world of refined feeling he can never understand. But you see, darling, I am helpless, aren't I? What am I to do?'" When we're children, we feel emotions very strongly. I'm sure we all have memories of that. Oftentimes, it's diagnosed as like some disorder like ADHD or something, but that's far beyond the scope if you're really running out of time. So, and that's okay, and our mothers are allowed to be emotional with us, but not our fathers. Or the mother gets the emotional burden of raising the kid. They raise their kids. Yeah, they take on basically the entire burden of bringing their kids to emotional maturity. But at a certain point with men, they are forced to be cut off. It's like, oh, stop being coddled by your mother or this or that. And a lot of that rage, according to Barbara Dumming, is because they're acting out a lie, which means that in some deep part of themselves, they want to be delivered from it, homesick for the truth. The furry, their fury gives us reason to fear, but also gives us reason to hope. And I'm all about hope. I love hope, and I hope that I can become better, and so can you. And hope for what exactly? The hope is for transformation, to once again be able to fully be, really, and participate in community in a loving way. As children, we're forced out of the wholeheartedness and connectedness that we're naturally born with. We're forced to bury our deepest selves and hide our truths. Now, hiding the truth is a breach of integrity. There's no way around it. And without being able to live your truth, there cannot be trust, and therefore there cannot be love, which is yet another thing that we need to restore. Rabbi Harold Kushner defines integrity as being whole, unbroken, undivided. It describes a person who has united the different parts of his or her personality so that there's no longer a split in the soul. We need to discover the part of our soul that we've split off and we have hidden deep somewhere. And you'll be surprised by what you find. And based on my experience, I've been working, I guess, on myself, and everything I found has been great, phenomenal, and I've genuinely enjoyed my life more since I read this book. That's why it's so great. That's why I recommend it. So, moral of the story is we need to break free from our sex rules. This is true freedom and independence. You are responsible for accepting or choosing the values by which you live. If you live by values you have accepted or adopted passively and unthinkingly, it is easy to imagine that they are just your nature, just who you are, and to avoid recognizing that choice is involved. If you are willing to recognize that choices and decisions are crucial when values are adopted, then you can take a fresh look at your values, question them, and if necessary, revise them. Again, it is taking responsibility that sets you free. And at the end of the day, that's all this is about. You always have a choice and you can choose to be better. You just have to have the will to change. Boys are raised to be empathetic and strong, autonomous and connected, responsible to self, to family and friends, and to society, able to make community rooted in a recognition of interbeing, then the solid foundation is present and they will be able to love. Imagine a world where we live in families that are not led through domination. Imagine if you could speak your true feelings, show your emotions, and imagine having no fear of your fellow human beings. Just imagine if you and the boys could go get a drink and talk about how you're really feeling. You can approach women, they won't have to have inherent fear of you. You don't have to be self-conscious just walking down the street. And that's why I really want to recommend this book to everybody. I want you to recommend it to everybody like constantly. You can find a free version of it online, I'll say. Imagine when you never have to think about what you say because you just say what you feel. That's where we all need to get to. We can't change the whole imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy alone. We can't do it collectively, obviously, but we can't do it alone. But what we can do is change our hearts, change ourselves, if only we have the will. Change doesn't happen overnight. You know this well. But day by day, you can just be a little bit better. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, honestly. I just really, really love the book. It made me feel things that I haven't felt before, and I'm still trying to process it all. Like I said, highly recommend it. And yeah, if you haven't read it in a while or you haven't read it, then check it out. And honestly, since I'm just kind of confused right now about how I feel about all of this, let me know if you have any more experience with something like this and whether or not what I'm saying makes any sense, whether you agree or disagree. Obviously, I always encourage critical thinking. Like everything I'm saying, everything Bell Hooks said is not necessarily right, but it feels right to me on my gut feeling and a gut level. So, I made a video about it. As always, I want you to go out there and be kind. Unrelated, I also have a Patreon in the link. Please, I'm broke and in college, so I'm getting out.
Knowledge.
I meant to say, so you're helping me fund my no, that's mine. I don't actually need it, but I would appreciate it. I'm not trying to work where I'm working anymore.